Welcome back. Today we are talking with Dr. Liz Royle. Dr. Liz, great stuff in the first two segments. Now, this segment, I'm wondering if we could kind of look at some areas that cause some of our problems. You identified them in your presentation as areas of risk that we need
Mhm.
to consider. Can you talk about these areas?
Yeah, so areas of risk, I think people tend to think of the big incidents, active shooter, natural disaster, a major incident. And they are out there. I've dealt with many major incidents of lots of different kinds, man-made, unnatural. They are big, shocking events. They affect a lot of people. They have the potential for overwhelming resources, including support resources. And so, areas of risk, I think organisations are better at actually thinking, oh yes, well, that might happen to us. We have a history of earthquakes or landslides, or we've got a major transport hub. That it feels a little bit more like a risk assessment, proper risk assessment. But nowadays, nobody can actually discount an act of terror, an active shooter. So a big incident has a lot of complexities and a lot of challenges, really needs good preparation. If we prepare well for it, then we should have a response that deals with the human side of things, that actually it just gets into effect and gets that first level of care out there and starts looking at a longer term strategy. So in some ways, that is easier for organizations to get their heads around.
Hmm.
The other part that they don't always think about is what I would call occupational trauma. So some occupational roles are at risk of coming across distressing incidents in the workplace just because of the work they do. So that could be people like cash in transit drivers, delivering money to banks, bank clerks, people in retail, having sort of abuse and assaults, violence, people who work with heavy machinery, work in risky environments. And what I would say to people is, as part of your risk assessment for a job, do you consider whether there is a risk for mental health from that point of view? And not just thinking about what's a stressful job, but thinking, is there a risk of crisis and trauma? Because that requires slightly different handling. So we might find that we're we're likely to have a big incident. We're likely to have just sort of robberies, assaults, accidents as part of our job. Um, but we can also have what's called cumulative trauma. So one of the things that people don't always look out for is um, the steady drip effect of dealing with something difficult. It might not be a big incident, but something difficult every day, day in, day out, and then we've got the straw that breaks the camel's back. So
Hmm.
in retail, you might find that somebody's being abused on a daily basis. I mean, the facts, the statistics for violence in the retail sector are absolutely appalling. The people they are being abused every day. And then it can be just, it's chipping away at your resilience. And then one thing happens and you might not even think it's a big thing, but that person then, that's the bucket overflows.
It's interesting you mentioned that in when I was a teenager, 16, 17, I worked in a corner store,
Mm-hmm.
and the abuse I got,
Mm,
price is too high. Why don't you carry this kind of
yeah,
brand? And, why are just all kinds of things, would be sworn at sometimes, or a
yeah,
couple of times even threatened,
yeah, yeah.
and I don't think I could ever go back to that
No,
because
no,
of
it's
what you just described,
yeah,
the
yeah,
abuse, and
and
it was
it,
building, and I went, I don't want to go there anymore.
That's it. So in the retailer, if they're looking at supporting you, they may think, oh well, there's been a robbery, we'll support you, but they may be oblivious to that kind of erosion of your well-being over time because of these low level, which they add up, and yeah, that they are very difficult. The other side, the other thing that's quite often missed is vicarious trauma. So vicarious trauma is where we're not necessarily directly impacted. We're not what you might call the victim, but we're around that. So we might be a first responder. We might be a CCTV operator who's watching it, and that level of exposure, looking at an accident or somebody who's been killed. Might be an investigator. Many organisations have investigative teams that come in after an incident, and they put the support in place for the staff involved, but they forget about that erosion of people who are dealing with this day in, day out, dealing with the worst kind of things that people do to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Admin staff, there's the secretary who's typing up notes about child sex abuse cases, lawyers, that kind of vicarious trauma is something that really needs to be flagged up on the risk. When you're doing a risk assessment, are these particular roles in my organisation vulnerable to that? And if so, we need to put something proactive in place, and we need to just have that, as we would any other risk, mitigate
Mm-hmm.
it. And finally, you'll get organisations who say, well, yeah, we're all right, nothing ever happens around here. It's a lovely place to work, and it's nice things. But then we've got a lovely close-knit team, we're like family. And then one of the team is killed or dies suddenly, and the whole team is hit by that. So you've got to look at, actually, nobody is immune, and just setting out your risks, working out what are my risks, and then what do I need to put in place to mitigate those risks. That is a key place to start with.
You got me thinking of dealing with some of the, because you mentioned different ways of dealing with this. It got me thinking of Maslow's hierarchy. Does that come into play on how to deal with some of these traumas that people experience? Because I know at the basic level, make someone feel, and I'm probably not using the right words here, your basic security, you're safe, and then you move up. Do you use that kind of a model to help people through some of these things?
It's not. I wouldn't use that model per se. It fits, but it's the model I tend to use is explaining about the human survival response, but it does fit in terms of stepping back from it, and it fits in the very, very early hours. As we're going through, as you say, very first layer, people need to feel safe. They need the physiological survival needs. And, we can't start looking at emotional responses if somebody is still in danger. There was a huge criticism after 9/11, where mental health professionals were actually speaking to first responders at the scene where they were working, and asking them how they were, basically dismantling all the defenses that were in place, unintentionally. So we've got to look at those basic needs. Is the incident over for now? It might be that there's an ongoing thing, but have they reached a place of safety? And are they injured? Are they cold? Are they hungry? Are they wet? We've got to make sure that all of those needs are met before we even start looking at how are they. So yes, it does come in. But then if you also look at, if we're going higher up, we're looking at, after safety needs, we're looking at connection. That is so important in those early hours. We feel safe if we've got people around us who we trust. And, that is something that organizations can look at. How do we almost throw our arms around our teams, our people, and make them feel as though we've got them?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important. And the opposite to that is sending people home straight away, immediately, and just disconnecting them from all that peer support, or blaming. So, all of these things are really important, for us to get into that headspace before we can start looking at, okay, what do people need?
Well, we've only got a few minutes left. Do you have any final thoughts or points you'd like to convey, for a minute or two?
I think probably two things that I find really important are, no matter how good your support processes are, you can have the best ones in the world. If you don't address stigma, and people don't access the services, then first of all, you're wasting your money. And secondly, you're not helping them. So always look in my strategy, how am I making these services accessible? If you've got people who work shifts, or they've got childcare responsibilities, or they work remotely, how are they going to access services? How do we say things like, oh, do you need support? Do you need help? That for a lot of people will be like, oh no, no, I don't feel like that. So I think education, but educate right through the community, because the community heals itself. That is the role of empowering. And when we can do that, we've got more chance of building resilience for the next crisis, because there's always a next crisis. So how do we come through this stronger rather than coming through and feeling damaged? That there are issues that we need to build into the strategy.
Well, on that, we've come to the end of our show.
Okay.
Dr. Liz, thank you so much. I thought this was a fantastic discussion. I'm a firm believer in addressing the people concerns, and I see too much of organizations and communities wanting to make sure they have the plan. And you mentioned tick boxes and things like that, having all that in place, but without the proper conversations about people, those plans will eventually fall apart. They'll mean nothing.
Yeah.
To me, that's what will happen.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed this, and I hope a lot of professionals, business continuity, resilience, or crisis management, leadership in general, really take to heart that you've got to address people. And it's not just the upfront, but it's also the after care as well, and being observant and knowledgeable about what's happening to themselves and the other people around them. So I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And on that note, we've come to the end. Everybody watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.